thank you for coming today. Hopefully more people will pop in a little bit later. This is our annual International Day of Peace celebration, and it has looked a little bit different each year. This year we really are going to have more open discussions and not so much in the line of having speakers standing up and talking, because we really, from some of the feedback we've gotten, people have said that they really would like to have something more interactive. So thank you, and if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you are not obligated to talk, but I encourage it. My name is Rene. I'm the Programming and Outreach Coordinator here at Hedberg Public Library and the coordinator for the Peace Week of events. And one of my partners in crime is right here, Dr. Mike Coogan. He actually is the person who instigated the whole thing, so we have him to blame for these wonderful events going and getting to the point they are. And we started as a kind of memorial or commemoration of 9/11 and the 10th anniversary, and it was amazing. We held it at Peace Park, and we had people from, I think, 10 or 12 different faith groups who spoke, and a Native American drum ceremony, and lots of really good things. And after that, Dr. Mike and I said, okay, now what do we do? I don't want to do the same thing every year, and I found out that International Day of Peace is September 21st, so just 10 days away, so that's what we decided to do. And it has morphed and changed every year, and we now have this main part indoors, because the last time we had it outdoors, it was like yesterday was, and there were people wrapped in winter coats and blankets, and so we wanted people to feel more comfortable. And so we thought it would be nice to have it in here where we have control of the climate. And so we have continued to grow and do things differently. One of the events that did not happen this week that we had planned was a peace walk at the 4th Ward Park, hosted by the 4th Ward Neighborhood Action Team. However, Mother Nature did not cooperate. And so it is rescheduled for this coming Wednesday at 5 o'clock at 4th Ward Park. So please join us there. I'm looking forward to that. I think it'll be an amazing event. Part of what we have started doing also, I think we started a year or two ago, is having recognition of different organizations as ambassadors for peace. And this year, we have selected a couple of people, or organizations I should say, that are new members or new partners for us. So we actually, she doesn't know that she's getting this, and she's the only one who's here, is SSM St. Mary's Health, or SSM Health St. Mary's Hospital. I should wait till I can read it. Has done an exemplary job of making these programs and events happen, and has been an amazing partner. So thank you, Sister Connie, and thank you to SSM Health St. Mary's Hospital. The other ones are Rotary Botanical Gardens. Yesterday they hosted our tree planting and meditation. And again, another addition that has made a big difference for our week of events. And then the other one is the 4th Ward Neighborhood Action Team. And so I was hoping that John would be here, but maybe I could give it to you, Father Earl, and you can be our representative. Father Earl is from All Saints Anglican Church, which is in the 4th Ward, and he is a member of the 4th Ward Neighborhood Action Team.
They actually meet at our church.
Yes, they do meet at your church. That's right. Congratulations.
Yes.
All right, so I think I have my agenda, but I always change my agenda for anyone who knows me, and it is because I like to go with the flow and go based on not being strict in the schedule I've come up with, but in who's here and maybe the flow, I guess, of the program and the energy and the activities. So what I'm going to do, I have a few short stories that I'm going to read from this very wonderful book called Peace Tales, World Folk Tales to talk about. And then we will have a little bit of discussion after each of those stories. And because I'm very animated, I'm not going to use the microphone. I'm going to stand up, but we do have this microphone in the middle that will pick up my voice. So, all right. This is my own personal copy, but I do believe we have this book here at the library that you could check out if you would like to. And there aren't beautiful pictures, so I'll just do this and I can read it. This one is about understanding and is called How Friendship Began Among the Birds. At first, friendship was unknown among the birds, for there was an intense rivalry among them all. If a bird saw another bird, he would at once say, "I am a better bird than you." Then they would start to fight. One day, the pheasant met the crow, and being in no mood to quarrel, he said, "Crow, you are a better bird than me." The crow was not only surprised, but very pleased at these words of the pheasant. And out of politeness, he replied, No, pheasant, you are a better bird than I." The two birds sat down and had a chat. Then the pheasant said to the crow, "Crow, I like you. Let us stay together." "All right, pheasant," replied the crow. So the two lived together in a big tree. With the passing of time, their regard for each other grew. But in their case, familiarity did not breed contempt, and they continued to show courtesy and respect to each other. Other birds watched the association of the pheasant and the crow with interest, and they were surprised that the two birds should stay together for such a long time without fighting or quarreling. At last, some of the birds decided to test their friendship. So they went to the pheasant while the crow was away and said, "Pheasant, why do you live with that good-for-nothing crow?" "You must not say that," replied the pheasant. "The crow is a better bird than I, and he honors me by living with me in the tree." The next day, they went to the crow while the pheasant was away and said, "Crow, why do you live with that good-for-nothing pheasant?" "You must not say that," replied the crow. "The pheasant is a better bird than I, and he honors me by living in the tree with me." The birds were deeply impressed with the attitude of the pheasant and the crow towards each other, and they said to themselves, "Why couldn't we be like the pheasant and the crow instead of fighting and quarreling?" And from that day onwards, friendship and respect for one another developed among the birds. And that is a tale from Burma. So, how many times have we been in situations where that kind of thing has happened with people? That people have said, well, he's not as good as I am, or she's not as good as I am. And then once we actually took the time to sit down and talk with that person, we found out we had a lot in common. We found out we actually wanted to spend time with that person. So, is there anyone here who would like to talk about maybe a situation in your own life that you can think of where you encountered that kind of attitude and feeling?
Well, I could repeat the story I just told you and Mike that really touched me.
That's perfect.
Do you want me to use the microphone?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can, or can everyone hear Sister Connie
Yeah, I
when
can
she's
speak
talking?
out loud. I was, yesterday we had the Rotary Garden tree planting, and I had invited, as part of the planting, a Buddhist nun came to do a reflection on peace for us from her understanding of her tradition in the sense of how do you find peace? And her whole theme was peace is within yourself, and to befriend that peace, and when you're not at peace, go back to that place and find a peaceful place. Well, and then I was taken, and so she gave us a nice meditation that afternoon, I don't know, 20-minute meditation out there in the wind and all the stuff that was going on. Then what happened is I was taking her up to St. Mary's Hospital to do an in-service for the staff about how to be present to patients. And she has techniques and ways to make you aware of what your presence really is and what it really means. So we were walking down, I don't know if any of you been up at Dean Clinic, but the corridor's a mile long all the way down. And we were walking down, of course she was in her Tibetan habit, so she obviously was being looked at. And so as we hit the elevator, and the meeting was in the clinic side, as we hit the elevator, a woman who I knew came off the elevator in a wheelchair, and her two daughters, which I found out subsequently were her daughters from the East Coast and the West Coast, had come to take care of her because she had broken her shoulder and her clavicle, and she was in great pain. And she was there to see the doctor. So the two of us, having just come from the meditation at the gardens, Pima, and I introduced Pima, of course, and I said, oh, Mary, I didn't know this had happened. I hadn't seen her for a while. She was part of one of my groups. And Mary and I had always had a very fun time, I should say fun time, fighting over religion. She would have one viewpoint, I'd have the other viewpoint, and we were friends. But, you know, we agreed to disagree kind of thing. And she was brought up this way, and I was brought up that way. So I said, I was worried that I had pushed you out of our group kind of thing with our debate or whatever we have. So, oh, no, 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 she said, I've just been really down and out, and her two daughters say, oh yeah, Mom is in such terrible pain and she's having awful troubles. And she says she just can't adapt to this. And she's an 88-year-old that's very vibrant. And so Pima said to her, what do you want me to tell the staff? Mary didn't hesitate for a minute, and I thought to myself, I wonder what happened upstairs. She says, tell them, for people like me, I want empathy and respect. Now, this is an 88-year-old woman, and I know, ooh, that's just exactly what we were talking about. That's what this story is about. And so I was taken aback, actually, because she would write, I want empathy and respect. And I look old, but, that's what I need. And Pima said, all right, we'll pass that message on, because we're going to be teaching the leaders of this organization about how to be present to your patients kind of thing, and to each other. She says, she says to Mary, now what can I do for you? And she teared up, and she said, and her daughter said, yeah, Mom's in a bad situation here, and she just doesn't know how to handle this. And they were sort of in tears. I thought, I really was wondering what happened upstairs. And so Pima gave her the 20-minute meditation in 3 minutes, right there in the middle of the hall at the elevator door, about peace is from within, and peace is a good friend. And you need to go back to the time in your life where peace was really palpable to you, that you really felt that peace. go back there and welcome it as a friend so you can get through this, so that you have that peace, that grounding beneath you. And she gave her about a 3-minute dissertation about what is peace for yourself kind of thing. We left the three of them, all three were teared up, and it was one of those serendipitous happenings that was moving for all 5 of us in that little circle. And it was coming from a place of empathy and respect and friendship. And Mary and I are the 2 unlikely people to be friends, basically. So I had to send her a nice little card in the mail this morning. But it's sort of, how do you, I don't know what you want to say, take the opportunity, I guess. Because Pina had not said to her, what can I do for you? And that's her business, basically. She's a pastoral associate up in Madison. We would never have had that conversation. So it's sort of the give and the take, and what can you give me and what can I give you kind of thing. So I thought it was one of those really important learnings for all 5 of us. And her 2 daughters, and I sort of know her 2 daughters are off on the fringe somewhere. And her mother is just, how it is with mothers and daughters. And so the 3 of them were sitting there. I think that moment was so powerful for them that they never forget it. And then we went on and relayed the message to the leadership of the hospital up there. So.
And I think you're right. I mean, how difficult is it for us to give empathy and respect? And should it be so hard? Because is that not also what we want, is empathy and respect? So just like in the story, if we're willing to give it, it is more likely that we'll get it. So yeah, that worked in very nicely.
It was sort of like the peacock and the crow, because Pima and her beautiful Tibetan habit. I mean, you'd be almost afraid to talk to her.
All right, so the next story is about building bridges, and it is called Old Joe and the Carpenter. Old Joe lived way out in the countryside, and he had one good neighbor. They'd been friends all their lives long. It seemed that they had grown old together, and now that their spouses were dead and buried, and their children raised and living lives of their own in other places, all they had left were their farms and each other. But for the first time in their long relationship, they'd had an argument, and it was a silly argument. It was over a stray calf that neither one really needed. It seemed as though the calf was found on Joe's neighbor's land, and so he claimed it as his own. But old Joe said, no, now that calf has the same markings as my favorite cow, and I recognize it as being mine. Well, they were both a bit stubborn, so the upshot of it was they just stopped talking to each other. That happened about a week before, and it seemed that a dark cloud had settled over old Joe, until there came a knock on his door. He wasn't expecting anybody that morning, and as he opened the door, he saw standing before him a young man who had a box of wooden tools on his shoulder. He had a kind voice and rather dark, deep eyes, and he said, I'm just a carpenter, and I'm looking for a bit of work. Maybe you'd have some small jobs here and there that I can help with? Old Joe wasn't the kind of fellow to take someone on just right off, so he brought him on into the kitchen and sat him down and gave him some stew that he had on the back of the stove. There was some homemade bread. It was baked fresh early that morning. Some fresh churned butter and homemade jam. While they were sitting and eating and talking, Joe decided that he liked this young man. And he said, I do have a job for you. Look right there, through my kitchen window. See that farm over there across the way? That's my neighbor's place. And you see that creek running right down there between our property lines? That creek, it wasn't there last week. My neighbor did that to spite me, dad burn it. He took his plow up there with a tractor, and he just dug a big old furrow from the upper pond, and then he flooded it. Well, I want you to do one better. Since he wants us divided that way, you go there and build me a fence, a big, tall fence. So I won't even have to see his place no more. Gall darn him anyhow. And the carpenter said, well, if you have the lumber and the nails, I got my tools, and I'll be able to do a job that you'll like. Joe had to go on to town to get some supplies, so he hitched up the wagon and showed the carpenter where everything was in the barn. And that carpenter, well, he carried everything he needed down to the creekside, and he started to work. And oh, his work, it went smooth and fast. He did his measuring and his sawing and his nailing, and it was about sunset when old Joe returned and the carpenter had finished his work. And when old Joe pulled up in that wagon, his eyes opened wide and his mouth fell open, because there wasn't a fence. There was a bridge. It was a bridge going from one side of the creek to the other. It had handrails and all, a fine piece of work. And his neighbor was just starting to cross the other side of that bridge with his hands stuck out. And he was saying, Joe, you're quite a fellow to build this bridge. I'd have never been able to do that. I'm so glad we're going to be friends again. And Joe put his arms around his neighbor and he said, oh, that calf is yours. I've known it all the time. I just want to be your friend too. About that time, the carpenter started putting his tools in the box and then hoisted it up onto his shoulder. And he started to walk away. And Joe said, no, wait, come on back, young fellow. I want you to stay on. I got lots of projects for you. The carpenter just smiled and said, I'd like to stay on, Joe, but you see, I can't. I got more bridges to build. So he walked on, and there ends my tale. And this is a tale from the United States, and it was retold by Pleasant Despain. So again, kind of was tricked into, he thought he was getting a fence built, and instead he got a bridge built. But how many times do we do that? Whether it's an actual physical fence, or in our minds, we kind of put up a barrier between ourselves and somebody else because we don't agree with them. And what ends up happening? When you do that, do you feel better because now you don't have to look at that person or you don't have to talk to that person? No, we generally feel pretty icky inside ourselves. And so building a bridge and trying to rebuild that communication and that relationship is better for everyone, and not building a fence to separate ourselves from the people that we care about or people maybe even that we haven't met yet. So does anyone have an example of that kind of situation in their life where maybe you wanted to build a fence or somebody else built a fence, but then you used the lumber they used for their fence to build a bridge?
Well, I have a little fence story.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
Well, we live in Evansville, and we kind of live at the edge of town where it's just, our backyard is a farmland. And so we don't have many fences. We had evil neighbors next door who put up a fence. They since moved, but my neighbors on the other side, I can see all the way down like four yards. And I wanted to put something up. My next door neighbor, he's a little old man that he's probably not too much older than me, but he's we help him with his garbage, and my son mows his lawn, and but he gives me his paper every day, his newspaper, and I wanted a little bit more privacy from my neighbors. But I didn't want to put up a fence because I didn't want to offend. It's like I know them all. I've walked over and met them all. But so I put up, and I wanted to help John when he steps up, because there's a little ledge he has to step up, and usually he just tosses the paper. But so we put up 2 posts, and I put up just a piece of lattice. So it gives us just a little bit of privacy. I mean, I can actually still kind of see the neighbors, but it also gives John something kind of strong to hold on to if he has to step up and or if he wants to, because sometimes he does come over and sits down and we talk a little bit. So
I love that. So again, it wasn't a full privacy fence.
yeah, I didn't want to
So-
be offensive.
Right, just a little bit to give yourselves just a little bit of privacy, but also the fact that you even thought about him and that he could use it to hold on to then as he's sharing his newspaper with you. That's fabulous. Anybody else have a bridge building or fence building or taking down of either story to tell?
In the story, the first thing that came to my mind was what he said. He told the young man to look out the window and see the neighbor. Okay. Isn't that a wonderful thought that we can see other situations, other people? Okay, now what are we going to do about what we see? Well, obviously his plan was to build a wall. And isn't that sort of a knee-jerk reaction? Well, we don't understand what we're seeing, so we're going to put up our defenses, not just fences, but our defenses.
Yes.
And what does that really create? You know, the symbol of the bridge, you know, it wasn't his idea to build the bridge, but once the bridge was built, it enabled communication to reestablish. And if all of us could try to do that in our own lives, see what's out there, not respond with defenses, but think of ways that we could bridge understanding and acceptance, that would be so much better, but you know, it's easier to talk about. I think sometimes we want peace to be something that somebody does for us, and not realizing that if it's going to truly be peace, we've got to be involved
Right, right.
in creating that. So.
And what I found interesting about that story is it is very typical of how situations like that happen, that there is a relationship and something happens to split the two people. And maybe they go a long time without talking, without seeing each other, but then one person, maybe unintentionally, like Joe, thought he was going to build a fence, but it turned into a bridge, and that's all it took was something, whether it was intentional or unintentional, to kind of offer the olive branch and put out his hand and say, hey, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I lied, I made a mistake, whatever it was. And even if you are not the offender in the situation, to be able to offer your hand back out to your friend, your family member, whoever it is, and say, hey, you know what, I want us to get back to where we were. Can we please be friends again? Can we please talk again? I think sometimes people are afraid to do that because they don't feel like, well, why should I be the person to do it? And so in this story, it's lucky that the carpenter came in and kind of was the facilitator of that, but do we always need to have a facilitator? Can we be okay with just saying, I'm sorry? Or can we please come back together? And I think if people would be more willing to do that, there would be so much less strife and so much more peace if people would just be willing to make that kind of effort to be the first person to say, hey, let's talk. And it kind of goes again to Pima's meditation yesterday, and when she said if everyone had peace enough for what they want and need, what would it look like? And in my mind, what I saw was people talking to everyone and smiling and being happy, and it was all very like sunshiny and very positive. And so I think We can do that, but as Pima said, it has to start within ourselves before we can share that outward with other people. So, all right. This next story is about working together, and it's called Lifting the Sky. A long time ago, the Creator was traveling. As he traveled, his face was shining so brightly, nobody could see his face. As he traveled, he carried in his hands many, many languages. And to each group, he gave a very special language. Everywhere he walked, he presented that group with a very special language. He arrived at the Puget Sound area in my country. He stood and he looked around. This is such beautiful, beautiful land. I need go no further. I can stop right here because this is the most beautiful land in the world. And in his hands, he still carried many, many languages. So now he tossed these languages in all directions. Now the people didn't understand one another. There were so many different languages, and the Creator had left the sky too low. Tall people were bumping their heads against the sky, and some of them were climbing into the sky world, and this was not appropriate. There was a time to go into the sky world, and not just whenever you felt like it. How in the world can we fix this problem? The people worried. The Creator has left the sky too low, and we all don't understand one another. How can we fix this problem when we don't have a common language? Now wise people gathered, and they said to the listening people, there is a way. We can all learn one word, Yahoo. It means to proceed, to go ahead. We could each prepare a long, long pole, and we could fix this problem. Each one of us is going to fix a long, long pole. There are still trees that can be made into long, long poles. So each one of you will help. You know the word, Yahoo. Now you are preparing for yourself a long pole, and everything happens 4 times. That is the magic number. So now all the people have been gathered. They have all learned this one word. Now you are going to put your poles to the sky, all together. Yahoo! The sky only went up a little bit. Everyone has to put their backs into their poles. Yahoo! The sky only went up a little bit further. Who is not pushing? We have to push harder, and maybe you all have to use a big voice. Yahoo! It went up a little further. 4 times. Maybe someone is still not pushing hard enough. This is the last time. Yahoo! Oh, we did it! Because everybody worked with one heart, with one mind, with a common goal. You pushed the sky up where it still is today. However, while people were doing this, there were some hunters chasing some elk, and they weren't paying any attention to what was going on around them. And the elk jumped up into the sky world as the sky was being pushed up, and the hunters jumped after them. And they got stuck up in that sky world, and they are the Big Dipper up there in the sky. There also were some fishermen. They were fishing and not paying any attention to what was going on around them. And as the sky was being lifted, they got stuck up in that sky world, and they became the skatefish that is still up there in the sky world. So of course, we are told, always be alert. Always be alert. Work together and work towards a common cause, and you can do a lot with one word. This is a Skagit tale from the Pacific Northwest, as told by Skagit Elder Vi Hilbert. So, again, working together, cooperation. Now I'm going to give an example. And my example is Father Earl's church and how his church has really maybe centered their work in the Fourth Ward around one word, cooperation. And by using that one word and working with the neighborhood action team and working with some of the individuals and other people in the Fourth Ward, they have lifted up the Fourth Ward to help it feel like a more welcoming place and to make the people who live there feel better about being there, and that they're more connected to each other, and that working together they can do a lot. So I don't know if I mentioned this already, but if I did, I'm repeating myself and it's okay. So the event that was supposed to happen this Wednesday on the 19th, the Peace Walk in the Fourth Ward, because of the rain, had to be rescheduled, and it will be April 26th, this coming Wednesday. And I think if you can go, it starts at 5 o'clock. It will be a memorable event. It will start with a Native American smudging ceremony in the center of the park, and then at each of the four corners of the park there will be prayer and discussion led by a different spiritual leader from different faiths. And then they're going to send out people on bicycles with signs. And what do the signs say?
The idea is together, working together.
Yes.
We can make a blanket of safety over the Fourth Ward. And there's actually on the one side of the sign is a quilt. Mm-hmm. It actually is a quilt showing the world and all the different parts of the world. And then I believe, if I remember, I made the sign, I don't remember what it said. But together we can blanket the Fourth Ward, or make a blanket of safety over the Fourth Ward. Mm-hmm. Just the simplicity of being present to peace in our neighborhood, being attentive to our neighbors' needs.
Yes.
That's what's going to cause it to happen.
Yes, and so I actually intended, I'm glad you're here, because I was saving that story as the last one to tie it into the Native American smudging ceremony and what you and your church are doing for the Fourth Ward. So thank you so much. That's very, very wonderful that you're able to do that and willing to do that. So thank you. And welcome to the people who just got here. We are, I left it on, oops, and now I just moved it. Okay. Oops. All right, well, there we go. So we just read 3 short stories and discussed them from this book, Peace Tales, and had some great discussions and heard some great stories. But then I also wanted to, from this book, and like I said, I believe the library has it, so you can check it out. But there are some good notes in here, and I would like to share those with you. Storyteller Marcia Lane, in her paper Stories, The Voice of Peace, An Agenda for Peace and Creative Problem Solving, makes some excellent suggestions for us all in the following passage. It is no more useful to tell a child to think peaceful thoughts than it is to tell him or her to fly. So how can we promote inner peace, inner harmony, and eventually and inevitably harmony between people? By using stories to do 3 things. To encourage children, and I would add adults, to look inward. To present kids and adults with several possible answers to a problem. To give children and adults a positive sense of value and purpose, a sense of their own strength and inherent morality. Most of us have stories in our repertoire that can accomplish these goals. We need to identify those stories, songs, poems, games, which work in subtle ways to encourage creative problem solving. Try to look at your existing materials with an ear and eye to whether they send positive messages, give alternatives to violence, recognize and reject prejudice, and applaud cooperation and collaboration. One last thought, when we try to tell peace stories by eviscerating traditional myths and folk tales, we end up with dishonest storytelling and the inevitable sense that the teller imagines a world without adventure, danger, variety, or disagreement. It is probably undesirable, and certainly impossible, to eliminate conflict in the world. But it is possible through the stories we tell and the ways in which we discuss them to expand the choices for living in harmony. In studying the world's folk tales, I, meaning the author, have come to the conclusion that these tales present a mirror of the mind of mankind. Throughout history and wherever humans reside on this planet, their tales speak repeatedly of the same concerns and reach similar conclusions. In the past, mankind's tales have stressed trickery and power more often than conflict resolution. Is it possible that by changing the tales we tell, we can change our warring nature? It is worth a try. So that's why I was trying to get you to think of your stories as we were talking about these stories, is so that you have those positive stories in your story repertoire, like she said, that when you're talking about peace, that you have some examples that are positive and more in that direction than the negative and the warring part of peace. That's one thing I think is interesting, and it does make sense that as you look for information or books or stories or anything about peace, you also will find books and stories and songs and information about war. And so just to make sure we're having a balance, and if we can kind of tip the balance a little bit in the direction of peace, how much better that would be. So does anyone have any questions or comments before we move on to the next thing on our agenda? Yes.
I don't know if this is interesting or not, but as I was sitting here, you were talking about the fence before and the bridges. We moved into our house about 15 years ago on Wilson Street, 4th Ward. And it had a privacy fence. This is cool. We had Buddhist neighbors over there, German neighbors over here, and we had our privacy fence. Meanwhile, we bought a picnic bench that we were going to use to invite our neighbors over to share, sandwiches with and stuff like that. But the stupid table was out of balance, and when anyone ever tried to sit on it, we took over, all those kind of things. I think it was $29.95. So we decided, what are we going to do with that picnic table, because it's not working. We took it apart and we built a little ladder to our neighbors to look over and meet the neighbors on the other side of the fence. So we used that picnic bench really worked for counteracting privacy fence.
I want it to be a ladder.
I almost thought you were going to say you took down the privacy bench and built a new picnic table.
That's what I thought he was going to say too, but I've gone to his house and I'm like, well, that can't be right.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, that's wonderful, because in a way it was a bridge still, but a bridge to go up over the fence and be able to
I didn't
see
need
the
the picnic
neighbors.
bench as much as I needed that.
Nice. Right, that's a great story.
Good story.
I like that.
I'd like to add or extend from Tuesday night's film that Sister Connie brought to this Peace Week, the Franciscan point of view, St. Francis of Assisi, being a person of peace in the midst of a war, decided that he might try to single-handedly end a siege between the two warring parties. in the middle of one of the Crusades. And of course, the Crusades is a long, long period of where any of us could learn the futility of war and trying to solve conflict that way. Having had a chance to watch that film and then learn a little bit more about it, I found that this event, it's a historical event, and of course it could be embellished since there were no eyewitnesses that wrote it down at the time. We don't know exactly what happened, but it's a good story, therefore, almost a fable, but it was a historical thing that happened in 1219. And I think the reason that film was made was that some Franciscan groups are working during this current year. It was September of 1219, so September of 1218, excuse me, what year are we in? 2018 to September of 2019. I hope that we will hear more about that event. And so having seen the film, several of us who are here today were there watching that film. I hope we will hear more about it. Anyway, in reflecting on it a little bit, one of the things that struck me was that you could argue whether or not Francis was successful because the siege did go on. Nobody put their weapons down, really. But I think what happened, what he did between himself and this sultan that he met face to face with, all the armies on both sides, all the armed factions said, you know, you can't do that. What he did was he broke down the barrier of labels. And of course, when you have a war, you have to label the enemy as one thing or another, a monster, a villain, the devil, invaders, whatever you choose, in order to want to kill them and fight them. What Francis and the Sultan did was they saw each other as human beings instead of labels. And in a face-to-face meeting, they began to break down the reasons for having a war. And even if it was only briefly in between two people, eliminating the label, which is part of how we always encounter each other. I know Neil even by labels as a peacemaker. I know Rene as an organizer. But if we concentrate more on encountering each other as a person instead of a whole group of labels, which is part of why the way the other interesting thing, if you'll let me go on here, the film did just a real brief touch on biochemistry of the brain and the way that part of our brain, just because of the need to exist, engages a defensive faction. Well, I think another part of our brain engages list making and organizing, so that even the faces that I recognize, I label somebody as, let's say, a daughter, or a minister. Any of those labels, it's a useful thing, but if we break down and see each other as a person, that probably is one of the very beginning parts of peace. And my real point is that that's what dawned on me after I went home from the film and reflected on it, was the success of that was not in ending the Crusades. And maybe depending on how you tell the story, maybe he was successful in ending the siege, but he was very successful in, at least in that small part of his world, seeing another person who had been labeled as all kinds of terrible things as a person. So if and when you hear about that story coming up in the next year, because I think if you listen in the right circles, that it will be talked about more during this next year and commemorated. Seeing a human being as a human being instead of all the other labels we have is probably the beginnings of understanding the peace of St. Francis.
Yeah, and I've had multiple conversations with a lot of different people who come from a lot of different perspectives. The one thing they have in common is exactly that labels are necessary sometimes. That's how we organize information in our brains. But if we can first see each other as human beings and start from there. So I think you're right. I think that will be a topic of conversation, and I hope that the film is showed more often in a lot of different places,
And I don't know who said it, it's called The Sultan and the Saint.
Sultan and the Saint. And I was telling people that it's available here at the library. Am I right about that?
I think the copy that I had given to Sister Connie is the one that I'm putting on the shelves, but I didn't because I wanted to keep it until after we did the program, so it will be available, yes. Yeah.
Good.
Another United Nations program called Together. We talked about this last year at our International Day of Peace event, and they have even more information on their website about that. There is information about other events and programs going on. In fact, there is one coming up that is another cooperation and partnership between All Saints and St. Pat's. Do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, it's, St. Francis Feast Day is actually October 4th, but when we celebrate a feast, there's an octave which continues for 7-8 days after that. So on the Saturday following the Feast of St. Francis, we've partnered with St. Patrick's to have a blessing of animals. And that'll be at the school grounds and their back parking lot. We've invited different groups and pet stores to be there. There'll be some refreshments. The blessing, they'll actually be able to get a certificate that your pet was blessed on that day. It's also the kickoff. We have the Academy Singers, which is a youth group within the 4th Ward. And this year we've adopted the plan to, it's with the shoes that grow. It's for the third world countries where typically children have no shoes and they have to walk through whatever's in front of them. They cut their feet or whatever and they end up getting infections and all sorts of things. So we want to provide the children in the third world with these shoes. And I believe it's very empowering for the children, the Academy Singers, to be able to do something for somebody that's in worse circumstances than they are. So we've been, through Sister Connie, which some of you may have met, we've been given enough shoes for each of the children to wear at a performance. And in each performance, we're going to try to solicit funds to send more shoes overseas to where the need is very real. And to kick off, I've sort of dubbed it learning to walk in the shoes of the third world children. And to kick that off, our effort, we'll be awarding the city manager a pair of shoes at the blessing of the animals. So it's going to be a fun day. So if you got pets, you know people that have pets, come out and enjoy the festivities. And
What time of day?
it's going to be start at 11 a.m. and go to 2 p.m.
And the information is on a poster that's at that table back there. Thank you. And then our Buddhist monk friends from Deer Park were not able to join us this year. And so I told them I would let everyone know, and there's this information back there as well. And the reason they weren't able to be here is apparently we got them really thinking it's a good idea to do something on the International Day of Peace or close to it, because they're doing their own event right now. And so they wanted to let everybody know that they are doing a peace meditation today, and then also they are starting an Introduction to Buddhism series. It's 11 talks, and they're designed for beginners. And again, this information is back on that table. Sundays that will run September 23rd through December 9th, and for an hour, 1:30 to 2:30, at the Deer Park Buddhist Center in Oregon. And they include topics from Introduction to Buddhism to First Noble Truth of Suffering, the Wheel of Life, and then an overview of the path and many other things in between. So if you're interested in that, the information is back at the table.
Rene, they have inconsistently done a day of meditation on the fall and spring equinox.
Yes.
And so sometimes, if that appeals to you, look at their website around March 21st, they'll probably be doing it again.
Yes, and their website is really good about giving information. All of this is on their website, and they do a lot of different events. So if you're interested, I would definitely go to their website. And it is on both sheets too, so.
Renee, also, as part of Peace Week, extended because of rain last
Oh,
Wednesday.
I did tell them.
Okay.
I think I've told them twice now, actually.
Wednesday at 5.
Yes.
Fourth Ward Park.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Well, yes, hoping. And then, like I said, please go, because I think it's going to be an amazing event. And I'm hoping it'll bring people to the Fourth Ward who have not been there, and that it will make an impression on them. Another piece of information that is in the back is information about the Pathways to Peace, and it has multi-parts to it as well. There are 8 pathways to peace, and they include governance, law, security. That's 1. 2 is education, media. 3, economics, business. 4, health, relationships. 5, science and technology. 6, did I say 6? I meant whatever. This is 6. Religion, spiritual teachings. 7, environment and habitat. And 8, culture. So that information is also back there. If you look online, you will find lots and lots of information about peace and different organizations that hold events, not just in one community, but around the world. And so I definitely recommend that. What are the things that you would like to see in our community? Because as our groups, the different groups that have made this event happen and that continue to talk about peace, as we've met and talked, we always are looking for what should the next steps be? What should we be doing next to promote, sustain, encourage peace in our community? So I would put that question to you. What do you think some good next steps could be for our community? And that'll give us ideas for what we can do next year.
I've read about communities having a potluck in the park where everybody comes. Or one of them, they had redone a bridge, and before the bridge got used, they had this big meal, table to table lined up, and people were sitting alongside it. And one time I read about Madison handing out coupons to folks at the health clinic or food pantries that were good at food trucks. And the food trucks came and provided food for the picnics, but the folks who had the coupons didn't have to pay $5 a meal. And so that would be a way to involve more people. But just the idea of eating together and in some way encouraging people to sit with folks they don't know or mix them up somehow would be one way that peace can be within our neighborhoods as well.
And I will tell you, I think it might be either on the UN website as one of their suggested activities, or maybe there's a link to another organization's website with a suggestion for something like that. And they call it a peace meal. And so, yeah, Neil and Mike know I've talked about that. I would love to do something like that. How cool would that be too?
And in my mind, it would need to be more than once.
Yes.
It'll take 2 or
Yes.
3 times before people trust it.
Yes.
And so we need to be in it for a longer haul.
The only thing I would say is here in this community, we have the difficulty that if we do a potluck, it's not supposed to be open to the public.
Well, I know the health, that's why they use the or the food trucks.
Food trucks for theirs.
Not everybody thinks that's the best food, but.
I guess I've always wondered whether there was a way that the monthly community meal could actually be a community meal. I don't know how you could get that to happen, but I know of other places where they call it a community meal and it's not just the people that need food that come to the community meal. And I know that it's open to anybody who wants to come, but I'm not sure anybody knows that.
Right.
I know that, but, and I think that people think, well, I don't need it, so I'm going to leave it for people who need it. But it doesn't, it feeds people, but it doesn't really change the community.
So it needs to get promoted in a different way.
Well, if that's the desire,
Yeah.
it could be.
And these meals are made in inspected kitchens,
Right.
Right.
so that you deal with that issue.
Yes.
We're working on that. They're made in my church and we don't really have an inspected kitchen yet. No, it is a industrial kitchen. But,
But the health department doesn't give you a certificate.
well, the head of the health department needs to go to right church, does still go to right church. He just didn't ever come down and pick. But, yeah, we need to, and there's a plan in force to make sure that people are following the rules that are requested.
Yeah.
Who's following.
Right. Right.
So I guess in my mind, that's an overcomable barrier
Oh, yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of potluck rather than
I guess that
potluck. It would be prepared.
Yes.
those meals are made by different churches every month. So whoever brings the meal in are people that are donating the food. So whether or not
Yeah.
people can think they could provide food for another 100 people, we could certainly put another 100 people in that room.
No. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's a committee to work on.
No, but I love that idea because I've just thought how important it would be, or it is, to break bread together. I even think of last year I got my son to go to the Scandinavian dinner at Faith Lutheran. He does not like big social events, but he wanted some Scandinavian food. And so he is not really, he doesn't talk a lot to people he doesn't know, but he was talking to everybody at our table. In fact, we sat there for quite a while, taking our time eating and talked to a lot of people. And he loved it so much that we are already planning to go this year.
All right.
So that breaking of bread is just so powerful to bring people together and get people to feel comfortable and talk to people that they don't know and they might not otherwise talk to. So I love that idea. So let's see how we can make that happen. I think that would be very, very cool. And it's funny you mentioned that, Kathy, because I was just thinking about the community meal the other day and wondering, do people who maybe don't need the food, are not in a food emergency, did they go there just so they can socialize with people and just get to talk
Not
to
to
people?
my knowledge. So, first, Cargill does a meal once a month too. And I don't know what, I don't know anything about that, but it's just members of the church that do that meal. So I don't know, it could be that they at least invite people from the congregation and others. And
First Con has a meal too. The one time I was there, I would say it was, there were not members were serving the meal.
Yeah.
Which is-
But the thing I was surprised about is that people drove for miles to get there. People from way out of town drove there.
well,
Where was that?
Edgerton, at First Congregational Church here in,
Oh.
what was it, Edgerton or Evansville or something?
Something like that.
They had come from,
Wow.
St. John.
I mean, one truck.
Yeah, but still, you know, I mean, it just makes you wonder what was the motivation?
Well, they know it's good food.
Mhm.
Yeah, it could be that they wanted the fellowship too.
Yes, yeah.
Because you get to know each other. I mean,
Yes.
because they would sit, I think, it seemed like they knew who they were going to be sitting with.
Yeah. And I will say that the Echo Meal,
Mhm.
which is the one I was talking about, is lots of fellowship. I mean, they come
to know each
an
other.
hour early, or somebody comes and plays music. So, I mean, that community knows
Is
each
together,
other,
right.
and they interact with each other.
Right.
It doesn't, except for the people serving, it doesn't expose
The rest of us.
the rest of us to reality. Yeah.
Right, right. All right, well, I think that is a good idea for a next step or an actual actionable item that we can try to work on. Any other ideas of next steps or other things we would like to see happen in our community?
Rene, I know that I live here with my mom and dad. I know that, what if you guys did a karaoke night?
You know what's
For
really
the
cool
library.
about that? I have a karaoke iPad thing that we got for QuestCon, and we didn't use it, so.
I just thought of that because I'm trying to work on one for the Mass in church that I go to. I thought that'd be a cool opportunity for the diversity action team and for the community. Because that everybody has a calling, everybody has special talents, just around in Janesville too. And I know I can come up here any weekend after I work on a Saturday. I can find somebody to get up here for that karaoke night.
Well, building on that, one of the inspirations behind Academy Singers was America's Got Talent. Like I thought, my
Yes.
little girl said to me, you know, well, couldn't Janesville have talent? And that sort of inspired. Well, maybe that, if we expanded on it and really hosted a Janesville Got Talent, I mean, people would love to be entertained and share their talents and
Yeah.
I will tell you, there is already a competition
Yeah.
that is similar to The Voice. And so it's all singing, but being more broad and general, like America's Got Talent, I think would be fabulous.
right. Well, you could even have a karaoke portion to it.
Sure, absolutely.
right.
Mhm,
And then if the different food trucks were there.
mhm. Yes, yes.
We're building a day.
That's right.
The other thing relative to peace that I thought of as I think about our neighborhood is that it seems like the incidents of conflict, violent conflict, have been because people don't know how to solve differences. And if there was some way to have it be cool to learn how to listen and express yourself and work through things, rather than get your gun out, that would do a lot for local peace.
Well, we did some stories that related to that from this book and talked about those. And I think there are some ideas there. we just need to build lots of bridges. So maybe get Home Depot or Menards on board and have them be physical, maybe a physical bridge that maybe travels to represent building the bridges that we're building that are not actual bridges. But I think you're right. I think, but how, that piece of how do we do a training of how to resolve conflict or issues in a more creative way, like it said in the book, or without violence.
And I mean, understand that the school district is working on some of those things.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Somehow kids forget by the time they get out of school, apparently.
Well,
Or
part of
they,
the
at the time
reason-
they were in school, that wasn't a part of
Yes.
how you do it.
Yes.
Or it's not tough enough or whatever. Or,
It sounds like what you're talking about is restorative justice.
Yeah.
could be.
Well, and the other thing I would say, Kay, to why it doesn't seem like it happens, even though maybe they've learned it, is because you can learn something in school, but if it's not modeled for you at home,
Yeah.
you're not likely to follow what you learned at school. You're going to follow the pattern of whatever you see at home.
Well, and to counter the kind of the culture around us these days of calling names and being uncooperative is really hard to overcome.
Yes.
I mean, it's a tough road.
I guess there is one thing very important that I always think to promote peace is communication.
Yes.
Communication through speech, communication through written words, communication in any way like we are doing now. So I was thinking to reach a large number of people about your initiative, like I never knew. I'm here 1 year in this town, but I never knew this thing is going on until one of my colleagues gave me some leaflets that I found. So reaching as many people as possible through newsletter or something like that, I think is very important. So that people are aware, and then people participate, and then people learn to how to be cognizant of each other's points of view and things. So I think it is very important.
Yeah, I would agree. I think communication is one of the cornerstones of the foundation of peace.
Yeah.
And if you don't have communication that's respectful, that part of your foundation is not going to be stable.
Absolutely. You're right.
So one of the things I had thought about along that line is having a program where it can almost be like a poetry jam, where you have a theme of peace or forgiveness or empathy, something like that, and then people can either bring their own poem that they've written or a poem written by somebody else and read that as part of the program.
Even speeches like a day of speakers, something like that.
The soapbox outside, people stand on it.
Yeah.
Or that reminds me of the whole truth and reconciliation process that was in South Africa, but has been used in other places.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other ideas?
I think one of the best ways to get to know people is to do a project with them, to work with them. I don't know how many people are aware of Cornerstone of Hope is actually Janesville's solution to Habitat. It used to be Habitat, but it got too expensive to be Habitat. So the people that were doing it, from whatever church they were from, I'm not sure, but it's become a church thing. And what they do, they build houses sometimes, but mostly what they do is try to find places where people need repairs and solicit people to go and make those repairs and have the people, the owners, work along with them, but they supply the materials. We went all the way to Kentucky to do that and then realized that maybe we could do that here. Although the Kentucky thing was good. Cornerstone of Hope. They're in the same building that Habitat was in. They still have a store.
Floral Expressions.
Yeah, right next door to Floral Expressions. So we've had the guy come talk to us at our church a couple of times. You don't really decide on a day and have a group of people go. They find, one of the things they did though, is they offered raised vegetable gardens to people, and they give away a couple of hundred of those every year.
Oh, wow.
And just for the asking, for the first time anyway, they bring in the garden and the dirt and the seeds, and then people in the next year can do their own thing, but yeah.
Wow.
Anyway.
I didn't even know about that. I mean,
Well,
I wonder how many other things in the community,
Yeah.
if we just knew about them, you know, like, what's under your rock? What have you hidden under your rock?
Right, and you know, I totally agree with you, because every time I'm at an event, I learn about something that somebody is doing. And I'm sure there is just so much, and unfortunately, I'm not sure why, other than maybe funding not being available to pay for marketing pieces, why there are so many things that we don't know about. Because then what happens, and this is coming from a person who has written grants and has partnered with so many organizations, is that then you have people coming up with an idea that 5 other people or organizations are already doing, and it dilutes the power, it dilutes the funding, and it would be so much more effective if we all knew what was going on, so that maybe instead of creating our own, you know, organization that covers this particular thing, that we take our energy and our funds and help something that's already in place. But yeah,
And that's kind of how we found them, because we were thinking we would do what we did in Kentucky and go find somebody that needed their house painted.
Right.
But I did a search and I found a Gazette article from way back when Habitat left. And
Wow.
it had a phone number. I called the phone number, and sure enough, they're there.
So does this group do kind of the restore thing that Habitat does? where
Yes,
they
they have a store.
They'll
The restore
take-
is still the same. Yeah, I don't know what they take. I've never been in the store, to be honest. But I think they do. They just kind of use the donations to buy the materials that they use. And it sounded like they actually solicit in the 4th Ward, but I don't know how they do that exactly. I mean, try to find people that need help.
Yeah, projects for them to do. Well, and so that's really interesting, because again, there's so much work being done in the 4th Ward. All right, well, that's something else good to do.
It's the same guy that was, his last name is Thomas, I think. I'm not good with names, I'm sorry.
Then the other challenge is, we have such a long list that it's hard to know where it's going to send.
Yes.
Or enough volunteers to do what.
But that's why it's also good to not reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely.
And to try to consolidate and work together, because there is not a limitless amount of people to volunteer. We find that even here at the library, you know, we sometimes struggle to have volunteers. So if people can just work together, it combines resources, volunteers, funds, everything, and just makes it more possible to accomplish some of those goals. So my videographer Gloria was running over a moment ago. Did you have something you wanted to add, or were you telling me, stop, you've been talking too long?
I think that with what you were saying, there's a lot of different organizations in Janesville that require volunteers to do a lot of their work. And I think to have a Peace Week, have a little bit of dedication toward those organizations and maybe have them come in and talk about what they do so that kids my age get interested, because we might not even know that they're there in the city and what we can do to help. So I think that'd be great if like Echo came in or animal shelter, and we can see what we can do to help. That's what I was saying.
So I like that. That kind of goes to something I've wanted our friends group to do here, which is a volunteer fair. But if we could do a volunteer fair, maybe with kind of the theme of peace, and then invite the different organizations who are looking for volunteers to come in and have a table, and maybe have a couple of them speak about the projects that they have and the things that they are working on. I think that would be really good. Great idea, thank you. Anyone else have?
Along that same line, you know, I'm just thinking, what's your piece of peace? You know?
You are really good at coming up with this
So
stuff, I like that.
We could have a day where, like she said, people would come in, but, you know, volunteers could be recognized and encouraged to participate in these different things.
And it's this huge wall-sized jigsaw puzzle, and everybody who comes can add a piece to it.
To piece
Oh,
of the
I like
piece.
that.
Yeah, we could end up spelling
We've got it all
peace.
planned.
Yeah, half the planning's done. Wow, I love it.
There is, isn't there a day in the springtime that volunteers are, that was supposed to be through United Way?
Yes, but it's actually now, it just happened 2 weeks ago. The National Day of Caring.
Yeah.
And so they get volunteers and they find specific projects. I'm on the Nutrition and Health Associates Board, which is the Rock County WIC program. And we get a group of people to help freshen up our space over on Racine Street every year. And then the city of Janesville works with students at UW-Whitewater to do a spring version of a Day of Caring, because they can't come over here to do it in September when the actual day is. And then they find projects around the community, and I have worked with them all but 2 years. And the last year, I didn't do it this year, but last year, one of the projects was cleaning up Oak Hill Cemetery. And some people actually worked on some of the headstones, but in general, it was like just picking up branches and garbage, and especially in the very back area. And then another part of that project was cleaning up the Peace Trail. And so they partnered with the city staff and cleaned up the Peace Trail. And I want to say they usually bring over like 80 students.
Or more.
Or more, yeah. I think
Yeah.
there's been like 100
Couple
plus.
hundred.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one is called MAD. Make
a difference day.
day.
Yep. Mhm.
Martin Luther King Day has been lifted up as a day to make a difference. And I was looking, I saw this on a church in California. It's from 2000, but the banner said a day on, not a day off.
Mm-hmm.
And this year, I think the public schools are going to have it as a day off.
In Janesville?
Yes.
Maybe some people could be prepared with
Projects.
something to engage younger people who are going to be off that day in what they can do to make a difference.
So we've got enough students around here.
Yes, we do.
Outside that might help think about how do you
Make it a day on.
involve the kids and what would be.
So put on your thinking caps, students, and help us figure this out.
Have a monthly volunteer,
Yeah,
Oh, that's a good idea too.
if you can get people, we do.
Right?
Well, and the city has a volunteer recognition for people that volunteer in lots of different ways there as well. So there's individual recognitions going on, whether we need something broader than that.
One idea that works really well for families and kids, like elementary age kids, is the packaging of the food that I'm not going to be able to think of what that's called.
Yeah, kids get
Food for the hungry or something?
What did you
Food
say?
for
Glenn?
kids.
Yeah, food for kids.
Which I
That's
don't
a
understand.
one-shot deal, right?
Yeah, it's a one-shot deal, but
They do lots of deals.
they do lots of meals. They have had one city event where, and they ran out of tables. They had them scheduled for an hour each, and they ran out of tables. They had it out in some big empty store.
Well, and then the school district does the Christmas basket
Yeah.
packing. So there's ways for
Yeah.
people who normally may not be volunteering in our circle to be active.
Right. All right.
Neil's out there saying, they're getting overwhelmed.
Anybody else? All right, well, I will let you know that next year there is going to be a change. Part of the reason I was asking for your ideas of what we can do is because instead of compressing everything into a week, remember I said we started with a day, and it became a week, and the week has always had 5, 6 different events. Now it's going to go out and be throughout the whole year. And by that, I mean the library is starting a new series, and that series is called Community Connections. So it will be all of these things we were just talking about, and we will have programs and events and speakers here at the library, and instead of just having it be where it's called peace something, because last year another thing we learned is people feel like the word peace is so broad. What does that mean? Well, you can break it down into pieces, and those pieces can be forgiveness, empathy, respect, communication, all of the things we've talked about today. And so to have different programs and events throughout the year where we can talk about all of those different pieces of peace, it seems like it's little bite-sized pieces that are a little bit easier for people to wrap their head around instead of this big idea of peace and what does that mean? Because it also means something different for each person, and that was how our meditation on Friday went also, is what does it mean for you, and what does it mean as you see it for the larger community. So I'm hoping that, we will engage more people because they'll find some of those individual topics a little bit more appealing or easier to understand and think about. And we're still, in the end, talking about peace, but in a little more narrow way, so. Thank you guys so much for coming. Please enjoy the snack.